Dr. Williams, welcome to MedBricks-webcast. First, deep condolences to your personal loss. Your longtime friend, Gigi, she was a kind and graceful woman. Myself and my children were blessed to meet her. During the racial protest, "I Can't Breathe" became a rallying cry for a chokehold ban here and around the world. Do you consider chokehold is a part of the bigger problem that is healthcare disparity?
Yes, it is very definitely a part of the healthcare disparities situation, and more importantly, part of systemic racism.
Dr. Williams, you were very active in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots. Um, City of Los Angeles put a strange kind of defense for deaths of black men during the chokehold. One that is, black men's arteries are in the neck are different from other races. Would you recall those events?
You're referring to the letter to the editor that I wrote to the New York Times
That's right.
on May 31st, 6 days after George Floyd was choked to death using a knee to his neck, which is essentially a chokehold. Uh, but my experience was back in the 1980s in Los Angeles when I found out about the chokehold being used by police on men, and 16 black men in a few months. 16 men had died, 12 of whom were black. And the chief of police, Chief Darrell Gates, approached me because I had written the textbook of Black related diseases, which explained the different health and medical experience between blacks and whites, not any difference in anatomy or physiology or anything of that sort, or
You
genetics.
spend a whole life dedicating to healthcare disparities in American healthcare system, particularly for African Americans and other minorities. Uh, as you know, healthcare disparity exists in all countries in different formats. For example, in India is a caste system. In in the Africa is based on tribes. So, do you know any method that successful in reducing the disparity that we could take and adopt into other countries? Um, as you know, we are from Silicon Valley. We want to cut and paste. Um,
Yes and no. Let me explain, first of all, what healthcare disparities are all about. Healthcare disparities is a term that was developed many years ago to explain the differences in the medical experience and the healthcare experience between blacks and white. It emanated from uh, the problem of poor healthcare delivery to blacks dating back to the times of slavery. And some experts called it slave health deficit. What that means is that black people were destined, based on the poor healthcare delivery that they received, to lead lives in which poorer health outcomes occurred. In other words, they developed problems such as hypertension and other types of cardiovascular disease, strokes, diabetes, and pulmonary problems. In fact, if you an entire gamut of serious diseases, blacks outnumbered whites much greater. And that was due to the fact that they received poorer health care. So that was the basis of healthcare deficiencies. The fact that healthcare delivery to different populations was was different, therefore disparate.
so that, but the question I'm asking you in a different angle: is there any method that you saw that is working? Any small community?
Yes, let me elaborate a little further. The United States since 1979 has had a system in place to evaluate the health care of the American population and subpopulations, which is called Healthy People. And at the present time, we have a paradigm called Healthy People 2020. This is something that occurs every 10 years, like the census, and it evaluates the health care that people receive and the outcomes of healthcare interventions. To answer your question specifically, if you look at various health problems, not only for blacks, but for whites and other subpopulations, you find that it's a mixed bag. There are some situations in which health disparities have improved, but the vast majority have not improved. And so that's the best metric of whether we're doing anything significant to diminish or eliminate healthcare disparities. So to summarize, we can say that there has been some progress made, but very little progress. The chief metrics, the chief things that tell us whether or not we're doing better are things like the longevity statistics. Are people living longer? Are certain people living longer than certain other people? Is the infant mortality rate higher or lower? So to answer those particular questions, we find that longevity has increased for all population groups. However, it is increased less for blacks than it has for whites overall. So there's a gap that still remains, something that I call the death gap, because there's a differential between the deaths that occur for whites and the deaths that occur for blacks. As far as infant mortality is concerned, which is another metric that we look at, we find that the infant mortality rate still is at least 2.5 times higher for black babies than it is for white babies. So if you look at these important measures or statistics for healthcare disparities, you find again that there is some improvement, but not enough. And in the present climate, we find that these are important ingredients in looking at why black communities suffer more from COVID-19 and have a higher death rate than you find in white communities. To be more specific, you find that the death rate in black communities from COVID-19 is at least twice as high than it is in white communities. And we feel that the reason for that is the underlying comorbidities such as hypertension, uncontrolled hypertension, strokes, diabetes.
Young millennials from all races around the world came out to protest the death of a black man. Do you have any special message for the next generation?
Is that we are being led by the young people, not so much that we are leading the young people. They are leading the fight, and they started out with demonstrations, which have developed into full-blown protests, but that's not enough. It's developing into a movement, especially the Black Lives Matter movement. And from there, we see the development of an actual, you might call it revolution, which is intent on changing the entire paradigm in regards to the societal fabric of the United States. And that's a good thing. But my main point is that we don't need to think about what we're going to teach the young people. The young people are, if you take a look at who's in the forefront of these protests and demonstrations and so on and so forth, and they are very diverse, by the way. This is not just blacks. This is, in fact, mostly other subpopulations. other ethnic and racial groups, as well as blacks. And so they are leading the charge. And we, as older generations, need to learn from them and follow them. I think the time is past that we can look to the so-called black leaders to lead us on, like Martin Luther King, for instance, was able to do years ago.
You're an eminent author and have written several books on healthcare disparity. Congratulations. The new book is called Blacks in Medicine, became a part of the Smithsonian Institution. Would you please describe what is all this book about?
Yes, I just published a book called Blacks in Medicine, Clinical, Demographic, and Socioeconomic Correlations with Springer just last month, 2 months ago. And that book is one that I conceived of to actually cover the Black experience in healthcare medicine over the last 5 was so impressive to the people at the Smithsonian Institution that they immediately swept it up with a month of its production and took it into their museum as one of only 2 books written by Black physicians for inclusion in the Smithsonian Institution. The other book was my first book, the textbook of Black-related disease. In any event, just to be more brief about the book, it is intended for people in the medical profession and outside of the profession to understand what healthcare disparities are all about and how they have limited the progress of Blacks or African Americans in our society, and also what we must do to correct those deficiencies.
Dr. Williams, you're a champion for healthcare for voiceless and powerless, but you are pride of all Americans and rest of the world. Thank you, sir.